For this next project, you guys are going to be using a method we call coil building. It's fairly simple. I think it's fairly simple, but it's something I've been doing for 15 years. So it will be a little difficult to get right off the bat. I did ask, and I totally failed to make myself one, for you guys to make a template that will help you kind of guide yourself. What you'll do is just basically take a piece of cardboard. We'll imagine that this is a piece of cardboard right now. And you'll cut out the silhouette of your pot. So I have my pot pulled up here, or did. So I chose this Delftware pot from like the 1600s. So it's influenced heavily by the Chinese blue and white, obviously, but it's on stoneware pottery, so it's kind of an odd mix of those kind of things, okay? So my silhouette's gonna be fairly simple. So I'm just gonna cut out a template that's gonna follow that outside curve. Does that make sense? And then you'll be able to take that cardboard template and line it up and make sure you're staying on track. Okay, so first I'm gonna start making my base. You can use the slab roller if you'd like. I'm probably just gonna go ahead and roll out a slab right here. I'm gonna cut off the top of this bag of clay here. You don't need a fresh bag of clay for this. I'm just using a fresh bag of clay. Set that aside. I'm gonna go ahead and roll that out. I kind of like the idea of just using my hands because back when this pot was made, I can't imagine that they had this giant machine available. I'm sure they had some things like that developed by that point, but most of it was probably done by hand. So I want my base to be about a ½ inch thick. Don't want it to be too terribly thick, but you want it to be sturdy enough, obviously, to hold up the weight of your pot. So you want to think about your base being about as thick as your walls are going to be. So with your coils, you're going to work at about like a little under ½ an inch thick. You don't want to get too thin because if you make your pots too thin, in the beginning the pieces will start to kind of collapse in on themselves, and that's no good. You'll also find that occasionally the piece will want to keep going this direction and keep growing outward. I will show you how to fix that if that comes. But I'll show you how to avoid that by building it properly in the beginning. All right, so I've got my slab rolled out all nicely. So sometimes I'll just grab actually what might work perfectly today is my bucket as a template for my base. These tools were left outside. They're a little rough looking. Just gonna use my needle tool to cut that out. You can use your knife too, whatever you feel comfortable using. All right, so I've got my base cut out. Okay, so now that I've got that done, I'm gonna take that and set it aside while I roll out my coils, okay? Rolling coils, I don't think is very difficult, but it is kind of tricky, I guess, in the beginning for some students. What I like to do is I like to roll out as many coils as I possibly can before I get started. So I always have like maybe a board with an open bag of plastic. That way I can just put my coils in the plastic and they're all ready to go. So I'm kind of creating like a coil making factory. I'm just making all my coils so I'm ready to go and I don't have to make them every time I put one on. Setting yourself up for success. Plus the coils have a little bit of a chance to sit up. You don't want them to get too stiff, but if they're a little bit stiffer, you can build a little faster with them. So what I typically do, back whenever I used to coil build all of my work, I would roll out an entire bag of clay into coils. So 25 pounds, I would just real quickly roll them out. It doesn't take as long as you think it might. So what I normally do is I will cut kind of logs out of the clay. So you'll see it's like kind of a log shape here. I'm just going to use my hands to form it into a coil shape. And now that I've got that rough shape figured out, I'm going to put it on the table here. And roll it out. Notice that I'm using all of my hand. I'm not just using my fingertips like this. What's gonna happen if I just sit here and roll it like this, like in one spot? I'm gonna end up with a flat on both sides. So you wanna make sure that you're rolling it completely. If you don't, then you won't have a round coil. It is okay if they're not perfect. I don't expect you to make perfect coils. Like the coil does not make the pot. Like, it doesn't have to be beautiful. So that's about as thick as I want to go. And you'll notice, like, if I get any weird edges or anything that's not quite round, I just go back and tamp it back down. But I'm moving my hands all throughout the coil, constantly moving. I'm not letting them rest in one place for too long. And I've got them curved like this as I'm rolling. I always suggest standing up as you're coiling. You just have a little bit more like control over the movement of your body. If you're sitting down, your arms really only go like this. If you're standing up, you have a little bit more range of motion. Okay, make a few more of those. And usually I have everybody come around and I show them how much pressure I'm actually putting on it with their hand, but I can't do that. So I'm gonna try to tell you how much pressure I'm using. I'm not using a ton of pressure. I'm just pressing down slightly, just enough to where I can feel like the clay kind of molding to my hand, but I'm not squishing it. All right. Another coil. You don't have to wrap them up like that. You can leave them all lengthwise. It's up to you. It just saves me a little bit of space over here, not having them all long. Make sure this thing is still recording. Yep. I'm a little nervous. I'm like recording so many videos. I'm afraid I don't have like any more room on my phone. Like, I need to transfer everything to my hard drive. Things I don't think about in a normal semester. Okay. I'm gonna get at least 5 or 6 coils rolled out before I show you what to do. And don't be timid with the clay. I always like see students are like, it's not working, and they're barely touching it. Really, like, you gotta show clay who's boss. Like, I'm sure you guys have noticed in the last few weeks that it can decide what it wants to do. But as long as you're controlling all variables and making sure everything's drying properly. It's a finicky material, but it can do some really great things. So if you want to see some giant coil pots, take a peek into Simpiway's studio over here. He's working toward his thesis show next semester. So he's making some really big coil work. If you want to check that out. It's pretty impressive. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start coiling. All right, so with my base, got my slip here. I'm going to go around and score the edge of this. Notice I'm not just scoring the top, I'm scoring that whole corner. This is going, if I attach my first coil to this kind of corner area, I'm going to avoid like that ugly seam that might appear later. Notice I have a fork. This will be your scoring friend for coil building. It's a lot easier than going through and making little tick marks with your tiny needle tool, okay? I would suggest just bringing in a fork from home. Okay, nice thing too is you can just dip it right into your slip, scoop some up, and score and slip at the same time. See, I am not tickling the clay, I am really roughing it up. I really want to make sure I get a good connection on that first coil. Going to score my coil too. Now, you do not have to slip and score between every connection when you're coil building. If your clay is of the same consistency, like with all of what I'm working right now, I won't slip and score in between coils, but in between every coil. But when I come back to this, after I've let it sit for a few days and the clay is drier, I will want to make sure I slip and score when I start making any new attachments. So anytime you come back to it after it's been a few days and the clay that you're using straight from the bag may not be the same moisture level than the clay you have on your piece, you need to make sure that you're slipping and scoring when you attach. So, as I start to attach this first coil, you'll notice that I'm using my banding wheel, obviously, newspaper on top of a wear board. That way your piece doesn't stick to your wear board. And I'm not squeezing, I'm pushing down. It's like, imagine me, I'm like pinching my nose or something and I'm pushing down over the bridge of my nose. That's kind of the same action that you want to create when you're pushing down your coils. You can kind of see like that pattern of my finger. I will also say, I will suggest that you use rods bud for this project because it will work a little bit easier when you're first starting out coil building. So as I get that second coil that's overlapping that first coil, you'll notice I'm pushing that coil down and around that previous coil. I'm not squishing them together, I'm not pinching them together to make the wall thinner. Okay, so from there I'm going to take my serrated rib and I'm going to blend those together. So you can see, try that again. So you can see on my pot it has a little bit of a raised foot, so I'm going to make sure I address that right away. So again, just using my serrated rib to really blend those coils in together and blending that first coil into my base. Okay, I'm going to make sure I go through and blend in any of the coil on the inside. I always have students ask me, like, do you have to blend the coils on the inside? Absolutely. The inside should look just as nice as the outside. Also, if you don't blend your coils on the inside, those coils, like where they connect, basically create little cracks in between them, and it could potentially like wiggle its way out to the outside of the pot, and then you'll have a crack on the outside of your pot. All right, so see how that's all nice and blended? No evidence of my seam. I'm gonna also flip it over and take care of any of that mess that's on that bottom. This is the best time to do it, instead of waiting until the pot's huge and unmanageable and impossible to flip over. So I'm just gonna clean up those edges and make sure that like my base looks real nice to start. I'm basically just setting myself up for success here. Anybody see where that red rubber rib went? Or did I even bring it in here? I know I grabbed it.
Is it underneath?
See it? Yep, thank you. It's like I spotted it right after I asked. So I'm going to smooth out any of those ridges with my red rubber rib. That way I don't have to flip it over again. Okay, so my base is started. So you'll notice that like the rim of my piece kind of comes in a little bit, so I'm gonna adjust that just real quick. Or not the rim, but the foot. Okay, that's better. Okay. Adding my next coil. Remember, like I said, I don't need to slip and score. I'm probably just gonna add one coil to kind of round out this bottom portion so I can get started on the actual pot. So I'm still hanging out on the foot right now. Pushing it down and around. I want my foot to kind of come inward a little bit, so you'll notice I'm kind of applying the coil on the inside of that previous coil. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes I say things and I'm like, okay. It's like having to describe everything rather than visually show you sometimes can be frustrating. All right. Notice I'm supporting every action I'm doing on the outside within my inside hand. And take your time on these, guys. Don't try to build like a big pot in the first class. Like really take your time and make sure your craftsmanship is up to snuff. Like right now I'm just taking my time to make sure that like I don't end up with a base that's gonna end up falling and squishing and then become non-existent once I build my pot bigger. So I wanna make sure that I've got a really good sturdy bottom. This action of kind of scraping with my serrated rib, I know it looks like I'm just shaping, but what I'm also doing is really compressing that clay together. The more the clay is compressed and the more that those clay particles are tighter together, the sturdier the piece is going to be. So the more compression, the stronger your pot's going to be in the end. This is about the time of the semester where you're going to hear me like obsessively talk about compression. So if you're one of those people that like loves to smooth things out and really just press and get a nice smooth surface, you might be my best friend. All right. We're gonna kind of work on that curve a little bit right there. There we go. So you're using a little bit of like what you learned with your pinch cups too, for this project. Pinch and coil are pretty similar as far as the action of your hands goes. All right, so now I'm gonna want my pot to start kind of coming outward. So I'm gonna add that coil further to the outside edge, just gradually. So you see how it's kind of leaning towards this direction? Okay. And smooth that out. Okay. Notice I'm spending a lot of time shaping things as I go. And it always helps to take a step back to see what you're doing. If you're sitting here this close to your pot the whole time and not actually like taking a step back and looking at the silhouette, you might end up with something leaning this direction or just going haywire. So always take a step back, get a good look at what you're doing. Okay. A few more foils here. So my intention is to get this pot finished today so I can demonstrate some surface techniques for you guys next class. You guys think I can get it done in one day? Yeah? Okay. Challenge accepted.
I'm already going really fast.
Yeah, I know. It's really a lot of the clay. It's a really like, so I don't know if I explained this to you guys before, but the reason why this clay works so well for building large quickly is because it has a lot of what we call grog in it. Do you guys know what grog is? No? No idea. New word. So grog is basically fired clay that is ground down into like a really thin, like almost like sand. But it's obviously made of fired clay. So we put that in our clay body so it gives it a little bit of more breathability. That way it can dry faster and stand up a lot faster. So if you're putting already fired clay into your pieces, it's kind of helping it to become a little bit more rigid. So you'll find that like when you're making sculpture that is maybe large scale or something like this, you might want to turn to something that has a lot of grog in it. But if you're making something really small and refined, something like these, like I use clay like this for my large scale sculpture, but for my pots, I use porcelain that doesn't have any grog in it. It cracks like crazy, it's super finicky, makes my life hell, but it's beautiful. So it gets the effect that I am desiring. So that's like when you sit down at some wheels and throw, like maybe you're using rod spot. If you're throwing, you'll feel like all that sand and the clay on your hands for sure. Oops, I'm getting hasty. I'm gonna blend in those coils first.
How big are you gonna make it?
I have a probably, like, I'm guessing that pot's probably like about a bean pot size, so yay big. Your size requirement, I believe, I accidentally left it at 12 inches, but 9 inches will probably be what we're going with this semester just because of our time restraint. We don't have a lot of outside of class studio time, so. Okay, and I will post this video on Canvas as well. Actually, I'll probably post it on my YouTube channel. I'm sure if you have all the links that I gave you before, you have an ability to get there. I don't have to give you a link every time, do I? I feel like I'm doing a lot of hand holding this semester. And I feel like hand holding does not set you up for success when you go to be an adult in the real world, so. All right, one more coil and then you guys can get started on your own. You might have some questions about when I'm going to attach these handles and how I will make them. They'll just be a simple coil, nothing crazy complicated. Did you get to see that, Reagan? Okay. When I attach them, I'll just do what we did with our handles for our cups. Make sure that the pot isn't too dry, obviously, or else it won't stay. Or it won't, it'll end up cracking off. But just make sure that your pot is at about a leather hard stage before you add your handles. If you're making any handles like larger than that, like some of you might have a pot with like a big, large handle, you want to make sure you make that and let it set up on the side for a little bit before you attach it. Because if you attach it straight to the pot, what's going to happen is you're going to have a sad handle. It's just going to go wah and fall down. So you want it to sit up a little bit before you attach. All right, one more coil. And if your silhouette is not spot on with your original design, don't fret. It happens to all of us. Just do your best to get as close as to your original silhouette as possible. What I'm really looking for, what's really important, is that you're getting the technique down, and that your craftsmanship and all of that is spot on. That's honestly what I'm looking for the most in these beginning projects is craftsmanship. Just, you know, seeing that you guys have an eye for like making sure that things are done properly. And I'm just gonna leave this coil like this, so you guys can come over here and see how I have attached. You can like look at my finger marks and see how it's attached, okay? So come over one at a time, check that out, and then you guys can go ahead and get started, okay? Everybody feel comfortable? All right, cool. Like I said, you guys are using stony white for your throwing project. You're welcome to try this project with the stony white that you already have if you don't want to purchase another bag of clay. But if you're fine with purchasing another bag of clay, I would suggest using Rodspot. I promise you will end up using all of the clay you buy in this class by the end of the class.